Yes, in the white jacket. Yeah.
Her son? That's her son?
Michael.
He's here? He's here. The bald guy?
In the
bald
kippah,
guy?
in the Yemenite kippah.
Yes, hold on a second. Okay.
Sorry. Just creating a little more space.
It wasn't really a plan, but that's
Just one. I do have a question for you. So, yes. Okay. So his name, he's used two names. Can we put the other? I don't know which one. I don't know what they're gonna. It's more the government. I don't know what they're gonna do. Yeah. Like just understand that. Oh, is that? Go for it.
You're giving up on the front steps?
No.
Thank you. Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
You want to go?
Right after I'm done with this, I'm right back.
Thank you.
I'll be there right after this.
By noon. By 1. Okay. Esther, do you want to sit? We've got chairs for you. You love life with me. Yeah. Oh, there's some of the students are here. Careful, watch your foot on the chair.
Graduate.
It's about everybody here, I think. Good.
Let me give you David. Do you have the
Good morning, everyone. So we do have chairs here for those that need to sit. Bonnie, if you want, there's a seat. I know you brought your own. But please, it shouldn't be like shul where the front row's empty. So come sit. I remembered everything except for the microphone stand, so we'll have to do with that. You know, we just put this tent up beginning of COVID. It's really come in handy. So.
Are you still the only one speaking right now?
Oh no, my brother's gonna speak. Actually, there's two people.
And that's David, yeah?
David, yeah.
So thank you all for being here. It's terrible that we need to be here for this. We have dozens joining us online as well. And we're going to, as Esther was just saying, it's raining because Fred didn't want to leave. It was beautiful yesterday, and it's raining today. And my response is, I think God is crying, as we're all crying. He was a remarkable man, and we're going to celebrate his life and his love for all of you, particularly you, Esther, your many, many incredible journeys and experiences together, your decades of marriage. Ezri meim Adonai Osei Shemayim v'Haaretz Ezri meim Adonai Osei Shemayim v'Haaretz. Steve, come sit. We all know that look that our spouse gives us. Sit down. I lift up my eyes unto the mountains, and what is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, the maker of heaven and earth. The readings that I'm doing now are not in your handout. I'll tell you when they are. It's okay. Our tradition teaches us to turn to the Tehillim, to the writings of the prophets, in moments of dissonance, of moments of uncertainty and disconnect from the normal way things are. And yet still, birth and death are as much partners in normalcy as does about anything else in life. We know that our life begins, we know that our life will end, and it's how we fill that time in between, the dash, the hyphen on the tombstone, on the matzeva. That's really the measure of a life. Not the first year or the last, but the ones in between. And Fred filled those years. He could probably make an equation, a formula that would talk about just how he filled those years with so much contribution to the world and to life and relationship. But we do turn to those writings from our tradition to find in those ancient words of comfort and consolation for our present circumstance. And I wanted to share just a few before we hear from the family. Adonai, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return us to dust and decree that we are mortal. For in your sight, 1,000 years are as yesterday when it has passed as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak it flourishes anew, and at dusk it withers and dries up. The span of our life, and I chose this because it has math in it, the span of our life is 80 years and 10, or given strength 80 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Teach us therefore so to number, to count our days, that they may attain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God, show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we might sing for joy all of our days. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. In your handout is another psalm, a familiar one, the words of the 23rd Psalm. Let's read the English of that together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. L'kol zman v'et, l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim, to everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And so let's speak now. Let's tell the story and learn the lessons from this teacher, who was not only a teacher of mathematics and complex equations, but he was a teacher of kindness, of menschlichkeit, of life, of love and compassion. David?
First, I'm going to read some remarks.
You just hold the microphone here.
First, I'm going to read some remarks provided by my sister Deborah, who was unable to make it. Then I'll add a few words of my own. These past few days, I've heard so many memories and stories, and it's been really nice. I'd like to share a few of mine with you.
David, hold it. Please be really close.
The biggest thing I learned from my father was that I could. In a time where being a girl was all about limitations, he didn't let me impose them on myself. That popular notion that girls weren't supposed to like or be good at math, I had no idea. Why not? A normal dinner time included story problems for each of us children. We each got math stories of appropriate difficulty, but were not discouraged from trying the harder ones. Math was just one of those recreational activities. Anyone who learned anything from him knows that he was a huge advocate of the Socratic method. It was virtually impossible to get a straight answer to a simple question. Every question was an opportunity for him to guide me to work out the answer for myself. Now I have a little story about that. If the question posed to him was coffee or tea, the answer was yes. Good. As frustrating as that was when I was trying to get my school homework done so I could go play or something, boy did it serve me well in law school. By the way, I just graduated last year. That was something I learned from both of my parents. You're never too old. There's not an age where you have to stop doing what you love. Even COVID was an opportunity for my dad to model and learn and teach. He was a teacher. I remember when he was teaching me to drive. He had me drive our car with a stick shift halfway up a steep hill, and then told me to stop. That was when and how he taught me to start on a hill. It took me nearly half an hour, and I was furious with him, but I learned how to start on a hill. He would not let me give up. He knew I could do it and kept telling me that I could do it, and had to until I figured out how. That was his way. Quiet support. He was not demonstrative. For pretty much any accomplishment, his reaction was, "That's good." I'm not surprised. He also made sure I knew how to change a tire before I tested for my driver's license. He never said that was to keep me safe. He just did it. He was many more things as well. He was an avid athlete, playing basketball when quite a few people thought he could maybe stop. He was not necessarily the best at it, but that didn't matter. He enjoyed it, so he did it. My mother probably won't mention all the times he'd jam a finger and wait to see how long it took her to notice he wasn't wearing his wedding ring, or how I learned from him to wait for the next day to get an injury tended when there was something for the doctor to see. Every morning, one of the first things he'd do was put on some classical music. It was the soundtrack of my childhood and of much of his life. He loved his grandchildren like nothing else, and even recently, when he couldn't tell me much else, he'd tell me how they were all doing. There was, of course, even more to him than those few things. Please take a moment to reflect who he was to you. I'm sure there are many answers as there are people here. Just a few months ago, my father said he had a good life. Every one of you here today, whether in person or online, was a part of that good life. Thank you for being a part of his life, and thank you for being with us today. And now I would like to add a few words of my own. As Deborah noted, he was a wonderful grandfather to Ben and Evan, and although I don't know as well from firsthand, not the same firsthand knowledge, to Noah and Sophie as well. Although distance limited the frequency of our in-person visits, and COVID the past 19 months made it impossible, he was always happy to talk to them on the phone, as the boys at Ben and Evan told him all about what they were doing at school, at camp, and in the sports they were playing. When we last visited Vancouver several years ago, he and my mother took the boys to the aquarium, and when we were all in Chicago for Sophie's graduation, even though we were staying at different places, we got together at the Lincoln Park Zoo, and if I remember right, he managed sort of to keep up with the two younger generations. I will also note that he encouraged me in pursuing my career as an economist, which, for those of you who don't know, includes stints at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and the Congressional Budget Office. Soon after I started college, I decided that I did not want to follow in his footsteps as a mathematician, but rather to do something that focused more on addressing critical social needs, not realizing, of course, that he was in fact doing so all along, and that he would even do much more of that in future years. He recognized that in economics I could apply what mathematical skills I have, of course not skills anywhere in his league, towards addressing society's needs. And that's what he did too. Mathematics applied to real-world problems, particularly in his later years, modeling of epidemics that proved especially relevant during the COVID epidemic. He was everything that Deborah said he was, and he left the world a better place.
Michael?
When I was a little boy, my father's desk was a magical place. If I broke one of the toys, my rule was to put it on my father's desk, and in the morning it would be fixed. My father could repair anything. I can still smell the solder from a favorite activity, sitting with him to repair old radios and other electronics. I realize now that solder probably had a lot of lead in it, and we probably lost a few IQ points each, but he definitely had a few to spare. Later, when my brother's bike was stolen and only the frame recovered, he bought used spare parts and put together a new bike, one I eventually inherited and rode for many years. I still love riding bikes. That desk was also where I'd often find him most days when I came home from school or sports practice, sitting there writing pages and pages of equations on yellow pads of paper with the Cubs game on in the background. No surprise that my brother and I became Cubs fans, and now also my son. It only took 84 years of my father's life to see them finally win the World Series in 2016. I remember the happy and cheerful phone conversations across 3 generations of Cubs fans that night. He took me to my first baseball game at Wrigley Field, and also at Fenway Park, 2 places that remain special to me to this day. I also remember summer evenings when I was young, watching my father play on the math department's softball team. He was a master at the opposite field bloop single, a mathematician's hit, not flashy, but calculatedly successful. He continued to play softball and basketball into his 80s. Multiple black eyes and sprained ankles did not stop him. His mathematical mind coursed through many other routine activities. Shoveling snow off the driveway was a highly calculated orchestra of efficiency. Me, my brother and sister with shovels, my father with the snowblower, and our dog Inga providing entropy. Or how he delighted in fitting the entirety of my brother's basketball team, plus himself the coach as driver, into our Austin Mini. And his humor. When we had guests over for dinner, you've already heard this one, but greatest hits. When we had guests over for dinner, my job was to take orders for tea and coffee. I always dreaded when I came to my father. Every single time it went like this. "Would you like tea or coffee?" I'd ask. "Yes," he'd answer. It took me, the slow one in the family, many years to figure out that I had to ask more specifically. First, "Would you like tea?" Wait for his answer. If yes, I was done. If no, then I had to ask, "Would you like coffee?" Sometimes he'd also answer no and just smile. Or sometimes I'd just ignore him and bring him both. Later, with his grandchildren now and Sophie, there was a beloved ritual family argument when cake was served, with my father having the job of cutting the slices. My mother would yell at him to make the slices larger, while he would calculate in real time that if each piece was as thick as she wanted, there wouldn't be enough cake. He also loved puns. Once, when some yogurt spilled in the kitchen, he exclaimed, "Now we have counterculture." Or a remark appropriate for today. My mother returned home several years ago after purchasing cemetery plots. She told my father how she decided not to go to the cemetery and see the location of the plots in person. "What do I care?" she said. "I won't be seeing the view." My father, without missing a beat, replied, "You shouldn't have done that. How do you know you wouldn't be buried next to somebody you wouldn't be caught dead with?" Above all, he was a father who showed us by example what it meant to live a life of decency, integrity, and modesty. He never said a lot, but everything he said was well thought through and with intention. He was utterly unselfish, steady, and just did the right thing. I remember clearly as a 5-year-old when he calmly but firmly explained to me why I needed to march with him after Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered, why he was such an important man, and explaining to me what he stood for. A recent PhD student, Jumi, who's here today, I believe the last one he supervised, who was originally from Nigeria, wrote to me just 2 days ago about working with my father. She said, "I never once thought of what it meant to be a minority. With Fred, everyone is equal. I never imagined that I would follow in my father's footsteps and become a professor. Alas, math is not my forte. But since that's the way things turned out, I've traded the yellow pads of paper for a computer, but I too can be found working with the Cubs game on in the background, and I keep my father with me in my mind as the best role model I can imagine.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, David. I've always been taught that there's a special place in heaven reserved for Cubs fans because they are the most hopeful and the most brokenhearted. The very first chapter of the Torah begins with the commandment to do math. God declares to the newly created human being, be fruitful and multiply. That was how I introduced Fred a number of years ago when he gave a Shabbat evening lecture over dinner at Temple Sholom. He smiled politely. I think he had heard that joke many times before. And I went on to explain that I became a rabbi to avoid math. And even still, I was looking forward to that evening's lecture on mathematical models of epidemiology, to which I confessed I barely understood the title and was anxious about the content. Fred then went on, in the space of about 30 minutes, to teach me more about math and modeling and epidemiology than I had learned in 10 years of graduate school or higher education, let alone what I learned in high school or elementary school. He made the topic so engaging, so accessible and inspiring that I truly felt like through Fred I had discovered a lens to see the world more clearly, more discerningly than ever before. During these past 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have thought back to his lecture on R naught and its importance in modeling the spread of a disease through a population more times than I can count, pun intended. And my math skills are at least good enough to count that many times. Unlike Fred, I never thought I would need to know about R naught and the spread of a virus on the scale of an epidemic. But Fred not only knew that we would sadly one day need that kind of math and modeling, he was a brilliant and insightful teacher and researcher of that very kind of thinking. His models and books have been cited thousands of times in other academic works and have helped guide public health officers, policymakers, and healthcare workers through the AIDS epidemic, SARS, and even now, in his retirement, COVID-19. I asked Esther and Michael, what was it like for Fred in his late 80s, retired for many years, to be confronted late in his career with a once-in-a-100-year global health crisis like COVID-19? And your answer didn't surprise me. Fred could not sit on the sidelines. He pored over the numbers every day. He ran models and analysis for his own understanding and in the support of the work of so many of his former students who are now on the front lines of the fight around the world. There is no pleasure in witnessing a global pandemic, but I understand how Fred in the last months of his remarkable life was totally and completely in his element. The very thing that he had been preparing all of us for, preparing himself for, warning us about, was happening in his lifetime. And he was there and ready with the tools and the wisdom and the insight to help society understand the spread of this deadly disease and to inform the important decisions that would need to be made on a daily basis. Fred did not invent the field of mathematical approaches for emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, as the title of one of the seminal works that features a profile of Fred is called. But he did help define it, apply it, and advance it to the benefit of the whole of humanity. That's not hyperbole. That's a demonstrable fact. As the profile in the volume first published in 2012 that I mentioned above explains, when talking about Fred, and I'm quoting now, Fred Brauer, who grew up with mathematics in his family, received his PhD from MIT in 1956 under Norman Levinson. And after teaching at the University of Chicago and then at University of British Columbia, to which he would later return with an honorary appointment in the mathematics department, he came in 1960 to the University of Wisconsin. And during his tenure in Madison, he became a cornerstone of the department, serving as chair among other positions and instituting departmental seminar in spherical trigonometry to show that mathematicians can also play basketball. In 2 terms as associate chair, he made important developments to the undergraduate curriculum. including sequences of pre-calculus courses and mathematics courses for biologists, as well as the infusion of differential equations into multivariable calculus, linear algebra, and the upper level curriculum. It was in Madison that he formed a long-term collaboration with John Nohel, also a student of Levinson. In the early 1960s, the two wrote what has become a classic textbook on quantitative theory of ODEs. A year or two later, Hans Schneider, also in the department, joined them to write a second text, unifying linear algebra and linear systems of ODEs. John and Fred wrote several more books together in the years that followed and worked together on some of the aforementioned curriculum development. And then the profile concludes. In the past 40 and now, I guess, 50 years, Fred has been active not only in producing and fostering research, but in developing college-level mathematics education to a large extent on a local level, but also in developing courses and authoring textbooks which present relevant mathematics to biologists, such as probability and dynamic systems. Tailoring of mathematical content to biologists and those interested in investigating phenomena such as infectious disease is a rising trend, which helps to prepare and perhaps attract the mathematical biologists of tomorrow. And it is an important part of leadership for the mathematical biologists of today to take part in this development. And then it concludes as follows. For all of his contributions, research in systems of differential and integral equations, in population biology and in mathematical epidemiology, fostering in the large and on the individual level education and productivity in these areas, and for his keen humor and being an exemplary colleague, we make this dedication to Fred Brauer. And I would have written one more sentence as his rabbi. Fred Brauer was a mensch. So many of you who wrote so many of you who wrote to Esther and the kids about Fred wrote those very words. The notes that you sent to Esther and their children, Michael and Deborah and David, that was the common theme. Fred's cousin, Paul Hudson, said it perfectly, I think, when he wrote to Esther, quoting, "Fred was the epitome of what I thought it meant to be a Brauer. Quiet, but always with something interesting to say, and above all, kind." Jokes about math and the Bible aside, Judaism has always had the highest respect and admiration for the science of mathematics. Unlike some other early faith traditions that viewed science as sorcery or even witchcraft, the rabbis of the Talmud and later Jewish scholarship embraced math as a way to understand and qualify and quantify the mitzvot, the commandments that God enjoined upon the Jewish people. Indeed, in one of my favorite passages in the Talmud, the rabbis ponder the question, why does God love the Jewish people? And then the answer is given in God's voice, that God loves the Jewish people because in fulfillment of the mitzvah of keeping kosher, the Jewish people will calculate the bulk of an olive. You see, the bulk of an olive is the amount considered to be the minimum of something, in this case bread, that requires the blessing over a meal. Further, it is quite clear from the very essence of Judaism, the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, that the greatest role that the human being can play in the life of others is to be a teacher. Vishinantam levanecha, to teach these words of Torah to your children and chant them every day. Fred married the two of those worlds together, mathematics and teaching, and to add to them a third crown, which was the crown of menschlichkeit, of being a good, righteous, understanding, and kind person. For these three things, the world was blessed every day that Fred was in it. And for these three things, and the very essence of our teacher, friend, cousin, grandfather, father, and husband, we, each of us, were uniquely blessed to know him and to have so many years to experience life with him. That, I am certain, can be proven to a mathematical certainty. Even with my rudimentary math skills such that they are, it's sufficient and obvious, and it's a comforting fact. May Fred's memory always be for a blessing. Amen. Friends, we're going to say two prayers, one here and one at graveside. Here we're going to chant El Malei Rachamim. It's not in your handout. It's a prayer for Fred's soul. And then after reading its translation, we'll proceed with the casket to graveside to recite Kaddish and to do the internment. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amitzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kenfecha Shechina, Im Kedoshim Utechorim, Kezochar Yemasirim, Et Nishmat Yosef ben David, Shechalal Olamo, Baal Harachamim, Yasirechu, Besetek Nafav Olamim, Vayitzror, Bitzror Chachayim et Nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, V'yanuach, B'shalom, Al Mishkavo, V'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Fred, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say together, Amen. So friends, with your assistance, we're going to process with the casket on the cart, just behind you and to my right, your left, to the graveside there. Ron, our grounds creeper, will help us with the placement of the casket and the lowering of it, and then we'll recite Kaddish and place earth. Thank you. Those that are watching online, we will take the camera with us so you can continue with the service there. So if I could get 6 people to assist me. There are handles on both sides of the cart. And then can I ask you in the green jacket, if you would to come right here for a second? Stand on this side. Hold tight, everybody. I'm going to release the brake. Let's just roll. We just need to hold. So Esther, if you want to just stand to one side, we're going to come through, and then if somebody can guide you behind us as we go. Okay? Mechalkel chaim b'chesed mechayei metim b'rachamim rabim, zomech noflim v'rofei cholim u'matir asarim, u'ken atoli shnei afar, micha mocha ba'al gevurot u'mido melach, melech memit u'mechayei u'matzmiach Yeshua. So you can push a little. We're going uphill.
Okay, George.
Hold tight, everyone.
Bit of a bump.
Going around.
It should be at that end. So okay, we'll just go straight.
And then turn around. Because the head's going to be this.
Just back up here. Put the brake on. Gentlemen, there's a handle here. You can hold where you were holding before. We're going to walk onto the boards. Be careful, it can be a bit wet and slippery. Lift up. And walk straight forward. Maybe easiest to sidestep on the board. Bend at the knees as you go. The same way you came on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Friends, and your handout, if you still have it with you, on the back page, well, actually on the inside first, there's a poem, and then we'll recite Kaddish. Does anybody else see that? Anybody else need it? When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around others and give them what you need from me. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands and souls touch souls. You can love me most by sharing your joys, multiplying your good deeds. You can love me most by Yitgadal, Yitgadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'yalma Divrah Hirutei V'yamlich Malchutei B'chayechon U'v'yomechon U'chayei L'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'bizman Karim B'maru Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam U'lamei Olmaya Yitbarak V'yishtabach V'yita'ar V'yitroman V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shemei L'kudisha B'richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Ushbechata v'nechemata, daminron be'alma v'maru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemayim, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'maru, amen. Osei shalom b'mrumav, uya asei shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'maru, amen. Friends, as is Jewish custom and commandment, we're all commanded to have a Jewish burial, but it's not something that we can do for ourselves. So we entrust our family and our friends in this final moment to be the gentle hands that tuck us in to fulfill this final mitzvah. So I'm going to ask you to come forward, family and friends, all to place shovels of earth. A reminder that it is customary often to take the first shovel of earth with the shovel upside down, so the cove side is up, to show that this isn't normal shoveling. And then to place at least 3 shovels of earth and return the shovel to the mound so that each person can take it on their own. So I'll ask you to come forward to do that now, and to please be careful as it is slippery around the sides. There's shovels on both sides. One other instruction, everyone. The handout that you have, it has God's name on it. It's called Shemot. We don't throw these away. We bury them. We bury them in a cemetery. So I'm going to ask you to place it in the grave. So we surround Fred with God's name and God's words. And also we properly dispose of those prayers. If you're comfortable doing it, there's no our custom to fully cover the casket with earth. So those that are able to, if you could help me, we'll place more. Friends, if you'll join me. I catch my breath. Our ancient relatives who were grave diggers were in excellent shape. And offering the traditional words of comfort to Esther, the children in this family, and all of you. You repeat after me. Hamakom Yenachem.
Hamakom Yenachem.
Etchem.
Etchem.
Batoch.
Batoch.
Sha'ar.
Sha'ar.
Avalei.
Avalei.
Zion.
Zion.
Yerushalayim.
Yerushalayim.
May God console you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. May Fred's memory always be for a blessing. Amen. There is a reception back at Fred and Esther's home, is that right? Directly following this service. Shiva Minyan tonight, 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock at Fred and Esther's. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock via Zoom. And the link was sent out in the email, and it's available from the temple office if you need it.
2988 Alder.
2988 Alder.
And just
number
ring the
18.
bell. Number 18.
Number 18.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Those online, this concludes our service.